Thank you very much for joining us here on PM Express. And let's go through some of the key issues that have emerged over the last 1 week in two separate research documents, research reports that have been published. You know, last week there was the research published by the Statistical Service and then the Strage. That was controversial because it really showed, and it uses a different measure, trying to track actual, perceived actual corruption, and then there's a perception part, because they were even measuring, quantifying the corruption, how much money people were paying. So that was slightly different. And then yesterday, there was an Afrobarometer report that in essence measures purely people's perception. But one thing that it showed, that is the overriding theme myself and my team got reading it, is that it showed that our democracy is in decline. And we're going to get into that pretty shortly. And one of the things that showed this is this. It is questioning about who is corrupt. The thing I want you to note when you look at this is the top three institutions perceived by people as most corrupt. In the top four. And I think that is one of the things that should alarm you wherever you are as you look at this. Because when the CDD and the Afrobarometer team went around doing the survey and asking people, what they noticed is, first, if you look at the number two, it is Office of the Presidency, so representing the executive. Number three, Members of Parliament, representing the legislature. And then number four, Judges and Magistrates, representing the Judiciary. So in essence, our three arms of government are number two, number three, and number four perceived most corrupt institutions in this country. If that is not alarming, I don't know what is. But that tells you a story about, this is in essence our democratic institutions, the three of them, all arms of government are competing when it comes to who is the most corrupt. And let's look at the actual percentages that the people put up there. Most being this color, most or all. If you look at the 55 between the executive and the members of parliament, it's almost a tie. It's almost a tie. The perception of people when it comes to members of parliament and the executive. So the first two arms of government, executive and the legislature, appear to have tied in people's minds when it comes to who is most corrupt, because 55% as against 54%. It's just a 1% separation between the two. And then followed closely by judges and magistrates. That tells you a pretty worrying story, right? And that's why we're having a conversation about democracy in decline. What is attributing, what is accounting for this? And then you have the police, of course, that almost seem to always be at the top when it comes to institutions most corrupt. And there's something that I need to point out. It's very, very possible that the police is almost all the way up there, because possibly we've all stereotyped them. And so anytime they ask you a question, it's so easy that it jumps, that recognition is there, and people just jump at the police. Maybe it's a factor. And we've seen the IGP's very detailed, well thought through statement he issued today, challenging the findings of the other report from the Statistical Service and the Strage. So that's a very important thing. But this is what we'll be focusing on today. This finding here is what we'll be focusing on. How come our three institutions, the arms of government, are all up there? But let me do something that is a bit self-serving. But I need to point this out because of media. This is the Afrobarometer report. I didn't do it. You see right at the bottom of least corrupt, if you look at the percentages, right at the bottom of least corrupt, is media. Private and public media seen as two of the least corrupt, because the non-governmental organizations are seen as the least corrupt at the bottom. Right next to that is private media and public media. Does that reflect reality? I know many of you will challenge that, because the perception is pretty widespread that the media itself isn't clean, as white as snow, but that's what the research shows here. And if you look at the graph here, This tells a story, and if you look at the judge's line, which is this, what you see, I'm talking about the judiciary, because that compares judiciary, tax officials, and the police. What you see in that is that in 2014, they were doing pretty badly, and then they started doing a bit well. In the next time they measured this in 2017, they did even better in 2019, but as you see in 2020, it appears that the judiciary is beginning again the perception is beginning to worsen again when it comes to perception of corruption among the judiciary. And then you look at the police. The worst period for them was 2014, and they seem to have done something well because it's begun to dip a bit. But unfortunately this year, the Afrobarometer has picked up again that the police, this is the second highest they've scored when it comes to perception of corruption with the police. Does that suggest that maybe the interventions that the police I know have done isn't working as they should? As for tax officials, they'll always be there. Even when you look at this, you see them in 5th position as 5th most corrupt institution when it comes to perception. Let's quickly go to another thing here when it comes to perceived corruption at the presidency and among MPs. And this gives you a trend analysis. One of the key things that will jump at you when you look at the office of the president, right, is that this performance here, 55%, is the worst the office of the president has scored since 2008. That is worrying. The worst that the office of the president has scored since 2008. We are talking over 14 years. That's a long time. So the worst in 14 years. That's something that should raise a few eyebrows. Since 2008, the worst we've scored is what is currently being registered on the Afrobarometer report. The last time it was this bad was in 2014, where they scored 53%. And then you look at the members of parliament, and again, you begin to see the problem that I painted earlier. The legislature is almost competing with the executive when it comes to the perception of corruption again. And you see that playing out in there. Now, pandemic-related corruption was also measured, and this is another key thing that jumped at me when I looked at this. When they asked people, was there in essence pandemic-related corruption? A lot, 44% said there was a lot of pandemic-related corruption. And then some corruption was just 28%, a little is 11%. If you combine these three, you begin to find that above 80% of people said either there was a lot of pandemic-related corruption, some or little. And it goes to the conversation, then the controversy in Parliament about let's do an open heart surgery into how we spend the pandemic-related money, right? And then another thing, level of corruption. If you look at the level of corruption currently, it is really, people believe, the question was asked, increased, as the level of corruption increased somewhat or a lot. And if you look at that, that's a 77% said level of corruption has increased somewhat or a lot. Has it decreased somewhat or a lot? And just 6% say it's decreased. So there's a significant perception that it's gone up. But I need to point out that this is not the worst we've had though in 2022. The worst is 2014 in the previous administration. 2014, 83% said corruption, the levels of corruption were this high. And this is, since the Afrobarometer survey began recording this, is the highest on record, 83% in 2014. And so I know that if you're a politician, if you're NDC, you won't like this. If you're MPP, you say, wow, I mean, yeah, we are 77%, but even our worst, yes, it's still better than what they did in 2014. It's something that the political eyes will pick up. But that's what the evidence says in the Afrobarometer survey. Risk of retaliation for reporting corruption. There is risk of retaliation or other negative consequences. And you begin to see that in 2019, that risk is 61%, but in 2022, it's gone up to 69%, which means that people perceive, if you talk about corruption a lot, there's a risk that you will have retaliation from those who may be concerned. Evaluation of government performance in fighting corruption. Another key thing that I thought was interesting is that this government had introduced they've passed the law to form the Office of the Special Prosecutor. They created it, and then they passed the Right to Information Bill. But it's not reflecting in what people perceive how their performance have been. The evaluation has been pretty terrible, because if you look at fairly or very badly, is 85% of people say the government performance is pretty poor. That's a pretty poor number. Fairly well is just 14%. So people perceive that this government performance in fighting corruption has been very bad. And 85% is a lot of people saying that in the Afrobarometer report. And if you do the trend analysis, say in the last 10 years, you begin to see this is the worst performance in the last 10 years. Certainly the worst in this government's time, and since under this current president, since he was elected. This is the worst we've recorded in 10 years, and of course in the last 6 years or so. So that's another key thing that if you're a government person, you should be worried. If considering all the interventions, that how is it that people are perceiving that your performance is that bad? Willingness to pay taxes also showing here. People generally don't want to pay tax, and there's no surprise there that you have that. And then support for democracy and rejection of authoritarian alternative. One of the things that struck me, reject military rule, 67%. That means that you have a fair bit of people who believe, who don't reject, they do not reject military rule, right? There's a fair bit of people. Just 33% of people, they don't reject it. Does that necessarily mean that they will welcome military rule? And what is accounting for this? Is one of the key questions that needs to be asked. Support for oversight of the president. Yes, president must always obey the laws and the courts. There's overwhelming majority of people believe that is what must happen in a democracy. Of course, that's what a democracy should do. Should opposition parties hold government accountable or cooperate with it? There's a view there by 45% of people that they agree strongly the opposition party should accept defeat and cooperate with government to help it develop the country. And this goes to a hung parliament. As you've seen, the government party had accused the opposition party of not helping. They were playing politics because they haven't accepted defeat from the 2020 elections. Well, 45% of people say they strongly agree that they need to accept defeat and help the government. Those who agree are in 12% there. So that should say something. But they will say, well, the overwhelming majority, significant majority still believe otherwise. Support for media. And you begin to see that support for media is also going up. The media should have the right to publish has gone up quite significant. That's the highest we've seen, again, in 10 years. Whilst the government should have the right to prevent publication is declined quite significantly. I remember in 2017, it was pretty worrying when majority said that the government should have the right to stop us from publishing. That has improved, and which is a good thing. Support for the media's role is also going up, and that reflects in the corruption, measurement that we saw. MPs and assemblymen only sometimes or never listen, and you begin to also appreciate that MPs only sometimes ever listen. Is that the MPs again are being told by the people that they do not listen. They do not listen. 85% of people say the MPs only sometimes or never listen at all. In fact, the assemblymen are doing better. What is accounting for this? My guests will join me and tell me their thoughts on this. Rating leaders' performance. And one of the things you see, I want to show you the next graph. That is evaluation of the president's performance. The president's approval ratings is at an all-time low because approve or strongly approve is 30%. Right? If you compare to where he was, this president, where he was in 2017 when he first took power, it was at 76%. Very, very high indeed. In fact, it's one of the highest. In the closest we've had is 2008 under Kufuor, where just before Kufuor handed over power, he was 78%, right? And in 2005, again, Kufuor scored pretty high. So when this current government, this President Akufo-Addo came in, you see how high he was scoring in his approval ratings. It only compares to Kufuor in 2005. Kufuor beat him slightly by 2 percentage points. So that was a very high score. So to drop from there to 30% currently tells its own story of where the economy is right now. And that hung Parliament, the expectations that we see there. So there's a lot. I just wanted to break down for you some of the key things before I bring in my guest. We're going to be talking to CDD's Guild, Freddie Siama. We'll be talking to the Ghana Bar Association. Remember the judges, they've been mentioned, the legislature. The judges can't speak for themselves. So the GBA, the Ghana Bar Association, normally does. So I'm curious to hear their view on this. That constantly puts the judiciary there as one of the poorly performing institutions when it comes to corruption as well. And then we will speak to a man who understands the way Parliament works. That is the legislative arm of government. All here as we analyze why is it appearing that our democracy is in decline. Stay with me after this break. Dr. Rashid Rahman is Executive Director, Africa Center for Parliamentary Affairs. Xavier Kuji is a Public Relations Officer, speaks for the Ghana Bar Association. Gilfred Isiama is a Research Analyst with the Center for Democratic Development. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. Xavier, let me start with you on this. So I isolated the CDD report, the Afrobarometer, but you have to look at it in the context of this last week. The Statistical Service also released theirs. I wonder how you react to both findings, almost validating and affirming each other, that prosecutors, in the case of the Statistical Service, they mentioned prosecutors, judges, and magistrates. Now we're talking about judges. So when I said judiciary, almost at the top of the tree when it comes to perceived most corrupt. How do you react to that?
I will start by saying that I am not surprised, but I'm disappointed. I am not surprised because human beings are involved. The judiciary is a human institution. Of course, we cannot have it all correct all the time. But the percentage assigned is what is alarming. Why am I surprised? I'm surprised because we had the announced expose not too long ago. Why should we still be having this? But I think it all boils down to the individuals who are involved. But I can also say that I am not convinced that many judges will demand bribe, but people will approach them. That is where the judges will have to look at why they are there.
Okay.
You applied for a job as a judge, you've been interviewed, you've been given an appointment letter, your terms of contract are spelled out. The only thing I expect of you is improvement in your conditions of service and nothing else. Because people were not able to solve problems. That is why they are there for you, to solve problems. You are the demigod or mini-god on earth.
Yeah.
So you must act as such. So integrity is important. Warren Buffett once said, expect three things in a person: intelligence, energy, and integrity. If the last one is not there, forget about the first two. And that is what I think our judges should be thinking about. But as I said, I do not sincerely believe that many judges, magistrates will demand bribe. So the intermediaries and the court users, including us lawyers, who would try, it is us who will try to influence them. But it behoves them to call in the police anytime such attempts are made. That is where their integrity will be put to use. Because if you're a man of integrity and your word is that I will not take bribe, so any attempt at bribing me, I'll let the law take its course. People know bribery is an offense. Why would you be bold enough to approach a judge? Would a judge be bold enough to ask for bribe? But temptation is there, so people will approach you, but if you're not strong enough integrity-wise, you will fall for that.
Yeah, I mean, you make the point about, if you look at the judiciary broadly, the judges wouldn't be the most corporate.
Yeah.
It may be the other
court users.
Court staff. But if you look at
the court users also involved.
Okay.
The staff may be used just as a conduit.
But except that in the report, they were measuring judges and magistrates.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what it means is that this percentage that was attached to the who's corrupt is to judges and magistrates, not lawyers, not other court staff, Judges and magistrates.
But my point is that judges and magistrates are rated this way because those who influence them may be lawyers, court users, and court users can use lawyers as conduits. They can use clerks as conduits. Or it could be this way. A court user comes to a lawyer goes through a court clerk or a court official to the judge. That is why I'm saying that we should not blame only the judges.
Okay.
I am not holding brief for them, but I believe many of our judges will not be bold enough to demand bribes.
Okay, so I see what your point. Your point is that the judges, it's a demand and supply thing.
Yes.
That the judges may not necessarily be demanding.
Yes.
But they are being enticed by, court staff and court officers, judges, lawyers, etc., making it hard for them to what? Say no? But they
should be able to say no.
Exactly.
Because that is your calling.
Exactly. So no matter the enticement,
you must be, you see.
In fact, the judge should cause the arrest.
Exactly. That's
of anybody
what I'm
who can. But
that's what I'm saying.
I mean, when was the last time you've had anybody
even
prosecuted because the judge had referred him to?
The problem I have is that many of us Ghanaians don't even know ourselves. We are all living borrowed lives. Why do I say so? Evans has acquired this, I must acquire it. And you see, we don't even bother to investigate the source of wealth. Parents know that their children do not deserve certain possessions, material possessions, yet what do we sing the praises? That is why you go and see your friend, oh, my son is this, my daughter is this, knowing very well that the source is not clean. Let's be bold enough to know ourselves. We should ask ourselves, what do we want to be remembered for? A corrupt person or a man of principle? Just last Sunday, we sang praises for Professor Mills.
Yeah.
Why did we do that? How many people can we do this for?
Yeah. Stay with me. Let me bring in, we'll talk to a member of parliament shortly, but I want to bring in Dr. Rashid Rahman. Doc, I mean, you look at, the thing that struck me is that the judges are in the fourth most corrupt, but right above them, members of parliament. And you work with members of parliament. This comes up a lot. And they are competing almost neck and neck with the executive. The fact that we have our three arms of government all in that top four bracket should certainly sound alarms, shouldn't they? Dr. Rashid Rahman, can you unmute for me?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can, yes. I can hear you, Doc.
So I was saying we should certainly be alarmed. And for me, I want to go even beyond what we heard last week to look at, our country's performance when it comes to, what we all know every year that measures corruption, the CPI, the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index. I think Ghana is hanging around 40-something% or so. We know there's corruption in our country, but what we didn't know is what the survey has revealed, that the institutions that we rely on as our saviors, the institutions that we rely on to provide transparency and accountability, are themselves caught in this mess. And for me, Evans, beyond Parliament, because in Parliament, we've been hearing this. I've been working with them over more than 20 years, since the second Parliament. Well, I hear, whispers, sometimes from people from outside of Parliament and sometimes from people from inside Parliament. If you remember, many years ago, Honorable Apio Ofori had this outburst about envelopes and so on. Our own current speaker, some time ago, had another outburst about, the institution and so on and so forth. The Electoral Commission, Evans, I think is what, for me, made the situation even more dire, because we've been hearing whispers about all these presidency and so on. But when you have the institution that is supposed to be the referee in guaranteeing the integrity of our democracy itself caught in this, together with these other key institutions, the three arms, then our country is in trouble.
And what you're referring to is that the Electoral Commission was ranked the sixth most corrupt. I mean, it's in,
Yes,
in
indeed.
that in the ranking.
Indeed.
Yes.
Yeah. And Evans, when I was going through the data, one of the things that caught my attention, was the aspect that talked about the level of impunity by high-ranking officials. It says, I think I'm just trying to look at official impunity is put at 77%. And even if you remember, we're all in this country many years ago when the former British High Commissioner said, at that time, I think in 2017, he said in the past decade in Ghana, he has not seen, and I think all of us have not seen, any high level, what do you call it? Prosecution when it comes to corruption. So when impunity is as high as this, then it only fuels, because when you are talking about high-ranking officials, I think people are just simply referring to the same group of people that we are talking about: the presidency, parliament, the judges, and so on and so forth. So democracy is not only in decline. I think our democracy is on fire, and we all have to be very, very worried.
Yeah, I mean, help me understand, sir. And I'll bring on a member of parliament before I hear Guilford. You work with them. So when they say the legislature is corrupt or members of parliament are corrupt, I heard some of the members of parliament vehemently protest this. And they say, but people don't understand how can a member of parliament be corrupt? Because we simply pass the laws. I mean, we don't even control our share of the common fund. We don't draw down. I mean, it's not in our purview. So how do you say that we are corrupt? We hear that the Ghana Bar Association spokesperson give an understanding of how possibly the judges may be corrupted. But for a member of parliament, how is it? Because they are passing laws.
Yes, I think they are passing laws. And, Evans, one of the things that we don't have in this country, we don't have official lobbying as we do have in for instance, in the United States and other developed democracies. So we have members of parliament sometimes being lobbied, behind, closed doors and through the back door, so that maybe the people who are providing this data and views about the perceived corruption by members of parliament would be similar to what our co-panelist was saying, that lawyers and officials are used to influence, judges. I think in the same vein, yes, members of parliament don't handle money, but when it comes to corruption, I don't think we are talking strictly about monies exchanging hands directly. If somebody, for instance, has an interest in a particular law that is before parliament, maybe, they go through some individuals who are now reporting that maybe we have been the
influencing the process.
Those who have influenced the process, So that is one way. And then, Evans, a few years ago, when Right Honorable Duaja, who was Speaker of Parliament, I remember one thing he said to us, that the practice where members of Parliament don't have adequate budgetary provisions to undertake their oversight activities has led to a situation where they have to rely on the various government ministries and agencies that they are supposed to oversee in order to carry out certain oversight activities. So, for instance, if the health committee is provided resources by the Ministry of Health to undertake an oversight activity, then you go and ask somebody from the Ministry of Health, what is your perception about members of parliament? You know what the answer is going to be.
Yeah, because
I think
it's a resource thing. I mean, stay with me. I want to bring in Gilfred quickly. Gilfred, something that I picked up from both Dr. Draman and Mr. Kuji is when you ask the question who is corrupt, how are you defining it? Is it down to bribery, or is a more nuanced question than just who is corrupt? What did people when the researchers asked that question? How did they define it? Gilfred, please unmute for me.
Well, so we didn't specify the kind of corruption we were talking about. We wanted to know from the people whether they felt these institutions and these groups of people were corrupt. So generally what they think and what they understand to be corruption is what they used in answering the questions that we asked them.
Okay, so I see that this could be a very broad scope of things. And I go back to the Anas report. Goats were, given to, judges, and there was money. But also, it could be neither of both. It could simply be somebody using a big man to, make a call and plead on somebody's behalf, and that influences the process. So you understand that is not necessarily exchange of money for some unmerited favor.
Exactly. So when you are dealing with perception, it won't help much for you to get something substantial if you want to go narrow and then begin to talk about bribe. And at the level of bribe, we are talking about experience. And that's where we do experiential survey. But at the level of perception, you want to open it up because people engage with these officials at different levels, their understanding of the work that they do, and how they even perform those functions. It could even be government allocating some programs or even buildings, and how it ends up in the hands of certain people by the influence of some people that they know. How maybe planting for food and jobs, fertilizers and things get into the hands of other people, or maybe gets onto the farms of some MPs, whilst other people are not getting them. It could even come from MPs interacting with their constituents during primaries and during elections. So they engage them at different levels, either directly or indirectly. So I think that there are so many nuances in there that it doesn't always help if you are looking for perception and you want to go very narrow.
Yeah, I mean, Gilfred, I need to ask you this. What's really the point of doing research like this? So we hear this come up almost every time. There's a CPI, there was this one last week, and then there's this one. That ranks and tells us, well, this is the most corrupt, this takes money. But what's the point of that? Well, because we know this already, that it happens. So they publish it, and then what happens? What's the point of this? What if I ask you what question? What would you say?
Well, Evans, I think corruption, as has been explained over and over, has a very damaging effect in terms of public trust and confidence in key institutions. And some of these institutions we are talking about are the pillars of our democratic governance. So if we don't address people's perception about some of these institutions, it may be having damaging consequences on the way we govern, and even on the way that people accept our democracy. And if you look through the data, you realize that even though people prefer democracy as the best system of governance that they want for themselves, you also realize that people's satisfaction of democracy is running very low. It's been decreasing over time. And some of these explains why people are not satisfied with the way democracy works, because they believe that people who have the opportunity to be at the helms of affairs tend to benefit more than the ordinary people. And that's why you see this high perception of corruption and low trust in some of these institutions. In the typical house, a mother will serve all the children, and the remaining they consume. But it turns out to be a different case where people think that the mother is consuming more to get her belly, filled before she begins to share the food for the rest of the children. And I think that is very worrying. We are not just asking these questions for asking sake. We want these institutions to take action and resolve some of these issues. So
Okay.
we need to address the fundamental causes of these by looking at the various institutions and the peculiarities and the opportunities over there that enable people to be corrupt, and blocking these things, increasing transparency and accountability as another measure, and also training people and constantly retraining them on ethical standards and levels of integrity so that they will be mindful of the role that they play either as public servant or civil servant, and they will be conscious about promoting integrity either than any other selfish desire or
Okay.
corrupt means.
I mean, I'll come around and ask the question. So, what do we do now? Now that we know what the situation is, really we have known for a while now. Peter Lanchinu Tobu is a member of Parliament. He joins us on the phone right now. Mr. Tobu, thank you for your time here on PM Express. Hello, Peter Lanchinu Tobu. Okay, we'll try and get him back. I doubt if he's
Hello,
there.
Ivan?
You can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly. Good evening.
Fantastic. I mean, do you accept that as a member of Parliament or MPs, you are the third most corrupt?
Thank you very much. Let me say good evening to our cherished listeners and good evening to my co-panelists. That Parliament or MPs are corrupt. The truth of the matter is that Ghana is corrupt. And everybody in this country, for us to begin to think about how to get out of it, must first of all agree that we are corrupt. I wasn't surprised to find the Ghana Police Service, where I left just a few years ago, to top the chart once again. Because the police service in every country reflects the character of the country. The police service in every country represents the mirror of the country. So whatever you find in the police service is representative of the country. So if you find a very corrupt police institution, as painted by the researchers, it tells you that the country itself has a big problem. It is deeper than we can see. So that is just the tip of the iceberg. What is interesting today is the fact that police is number one, the presidency is number two, and quite funny. You see, the presidency is chasing seriously to take up the first position. So when you think about the presidency taking up the first position on the corruption perception index chart, it tells you that the whole country has a challenge with corruption. And probably it is just inbuilt. It is inbuilt in our culture, it is inbuilt in our institutions, and the kind of lackadaisical attitude we have in the institutions, the red tapeism, the ineffective administrative practices that deliberately slows the process for people to be compelled to push the process through by bribing through the system. All these things, we have to look at it as a people and agree that, listen, it is not about pointing fingers. Ghana has a problem, and it's been confirmed by the Global Corruption Perception Index just recently, where Ghana is 73rd on the list with a very low mark of 43. That is just a confirmation. So if you talk about the fact that parliamentarians are corrupt, generically, oh yes, every Ghanaian is corrupt. And the fact that you are parliamentarian doesn't make you a different Ghanaian. Everybody is a potential criminal. I've always said everybody is potentially corrupt. Without transparency, without a system that can expose people who are corrupt, you will find a huge corruption scandal being covered, because in that heat of a cover-up, where there is blue belly in many of the institutions, every institution wants to cover up so that it doesn't come out like, oh, this is the most corrupt institution. But the Ghana Police Service of late, I think with technology and other things, they are trying to expose every rot in the system. So I'm not surprised that people are seeing it. The kind of blue veil that has gone on in many institutions, if we lift the veil, I'm sure that we'll be very shocked.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you on I hear you what you're saying, but because you're a member of Parliament, I know you're also a former police officer, so you are passionate about the police. The members of Parliament, and if you look at the score for the MPs and the office of the president, you are almost competing in terms of who takes that second position, because it's 45% for the presidency, 54% for the MP. So this is 1 percentage point difference there. I mean, You talked about, yes, we are all corrupt, but the problem is members of Parliament are supposed to be the legislature. You are the second arm of government. What is it that the MPs are doing as a member of parliament and the parliament itself to fix the problem, considering that you accept that this is possibly reflecting reality?
Thank you very much. What I've realized in parliament is the fact that why are members of parliament perceived to be corrupt? We have monetized our democracy. And in monetizing democracy, you are pushing every MP to get the money through whatever means to be able to stay in power or to be able to stay in parliament. And the monetization of the democracy is telling that this democracy is not sustainable if we don't change our ways. Look at the amount of money that I shared. Recently, I had a joke on Facebook when somebody wrote to the IMF on his Facebook wall saying that, IMF, please don't give money to Ghana. If you want money, look, Ghana has money. If you want to challenge me, go to the stadium where the MPP will be having their National Delegate Congress. You can have enough money to give back to Ghana, and you don't need to lend any money to Ghana. That was a statement that was on the lighter note, but think of it. Come to think of it, that is a serious statement to tell you there is money in this country. But it's just out of the greed, out of the corruption, out of the misapplication of the funds that we have gotten to where we are. And who are those who were at the Accra Sports Stadium? Politicians. What were they fighting for? To get political positions. Why would they get political positions? Because it is easy to be corrupt in the political office and you will not be dealt with because there is a kind of power that is covering you. The ordinary criminal, when you are corrupt, in fact, you commit a small crime, a petty crime, you are sent to court. And that is why when you go to our jail, our prison, you will find vulnerable people in jail. You will never find any influential person in jail. And the best thing for us to understand is that if we have to fight corruption, we need to agree that if the research says parliament is corrupt, if the research says the presidency is corrupt, let's do inner reflection. Accept the fact and see what we can do to move away from that negative perception. Fighting, blue-veiling, denying will not help us.
I mean, Xavier, so he makes a point that this is just a reflection of our society, that we are all corrupt. And so, yeah, I mean, MPs are members of the society, executive members of society. But can we make an exception for the judiciary? Because as many have said, you are last line of defense. And when all of us are corrupt, you must hold us in check. Because eventually, if somebody, is bold enough to want to crack down on corruption, it's only the courts that will crack that whip eventually, because you have the final say on this. But to think that you're also up there, isn't that really where the tie hits the road?
Evans, thank you. As the MP said, judges in Ghana, magistrates in Ghana are also Ghanaians. And as I made a point earlier, I do not sincerely think that a level-headed judge in a right frame of mind would demand a bribe.
Yeah, but you've made that point. But isn't that point not tenable? Because the judge is supposed to be above reproach.
That is why I also made a point that judges must not forget that when it comes to integrity, they are to be 100%. We expect nothing less than that from them. That is why, even constitutionally, the only grounds for removing a judge is either incompetence or moral, if you are short of moral uprightness. And integrity boils down to being morally upright. So for me, we have an issue. We all have to deal with it. But I think that by and large, as a nation or as a people, our definition of success is what is bringing all this people. Because everybody now thinks that success is all about material possessions. Nobody wants it to be said of him that, oh, he was a good man, he supported me to do this. Even if he did, I believe he did it through corrupt means.
Yeah,
Why should it be so?
Because you represent the GBA, I need to bring it back to the because the judges and magistrates, mostly those who are appointed are very advanced in age. So they are not
always.
Yeah, but when you go to the serious side of it, the superior courts, they are mostly very advanced in age. Yeah. So you think that they would have seen it all. They will not be the type who will be simply wanting,
But Evans,
wealth
if your
overnight.
grandson is driving a Mercedes-Benz S550 and you, Supreme Court judge, you are still using, now they have Land Cruisers, but your private car, which is not official, is nothing to write home about, and you meet in your village. If you are not careful, you you may fall for some of these things. So to me, it depends on the individual. People must begin to cherish their values and have principles. I have always said, Xavier Kuje cannot change Ghana or wherever I find myself in Ghana. But people must know what I stand for. I have always said that.
What reforms? We saw Georgina Wood on the back of the Anas Maria Anas expose attempt, he tried to purge the system of the judges who were named. What system do you see, because you work in the system, the judiciary, is there a systematic, well-grounded approach to try and deal with this problem in the judiciary?
Of course, they have code of ethics.
But everybody does.
No. Even
everybody does.
The point is,
if that's all you have, then you haven't even begun.
The point is this. Those codes are meant for the judges. But when it comes to implementing them, every Ghanaian who is a court user or who has contact with the courts and who has to deal with judges must do something about it. Because
but what if we don't?
If you don't report, how then do they get to know? Chief Justice and his lieutenants are in their offices, administrators. They don't go around the courts on daily basis. Even if
what about approaching it in a proactive manner? Don't wait for the report. Like a nurse, investigate. Assume that it's happening, because the research, not even assume, the research says it's happening. So find it. Make it impossible for the person to know that he may get away with it, or the judge, because they know they can get it, they will do it. Is there a system that does that?
I can give you the example of the Anas expose.
Yeah.
The judges involved, all of them are gone home.
True.
They've been exposed.
Because Anas found them.
Yes, and I am saying that apart from Anas doing his investigative work, you and I, every ordinary Ghanaian who knows of some of these things, should report them. I am sure the authorities will not sit down. Okay. We don't have to wait for Anas. Lawyers must do it. Court users must do it. And I tell you, the court users are those who do many of the things. If you are not a strong lawyer yourself, ethically, principled man, a client can come to you and say, I want you to go and influence this case for me.
Yeah.
But I have always said that if your case is not good, I will tell you it's not good. But I lose nothing.
Do you think the structures currently in place, because it's about deterrence, right?
Yes.
Do you think the structures you have in place now in the judiciary provide enough deterrence?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. Dr. Rashid Rahman, let's drill down to trying to deal with the problem. And we've had the judiciary's intervention on this. This problem with the parliament, you've said it, it's been talked about. Even the current speaker had calls to allege that MPs take bribes. And that was a big controversy back in the day. Over the years, have you seen enough work to deal with this, to address this perception in the legislature?
No, Evans, I haven't seen enough. One of the things that I had occasion to tell some members of parliament just a few weekends ago, when we were discussing their oversight role in this 8th parliament, was the fact that when it comes to holding themselves accountable, when it comes to issues of integrity in the House, it looks like that is one of the weakest links, if you like, in the way the House is managed. Because you remember the issue of the Privileges Committee. Currently, we have one big one before us. I don't know how it's going to end. And we've had several instances in the past. Issues were referred to the Privileges Committee, and then we see some cold feet. So that when it comes to members of parliament holding themselves to the very high standards that we expect of them, the House, I believe, has fallen short. And so I haven't seen very much, if you like, in terms of maybe reforms. I know the Right Honorable Speaker has been talking about code of ethics, code of conduct, and so on. But like you are saying, if you have a code, that is just a code, that doesn't bite anybody, then really, you are better off not even having a code. So I don't know. I think perhaps maybe the reason why we see a very high attrition rate anytime we have elections, particularly maybe reference to these last elections, is because maybe Parliament is not living up to the very high standards that we expect. But unfortunately, I think we can only do this every 4 years.
Yeah.
And even when there are problems, like we are seeing in the case of Honorable Adjoa Safo, then the issue becomes politicized, and then you end up getting the issue being dragged for a very long time, and the people who are supposed to be represented are the only ones that suffer.
Yeah, I mean, as we speak
Again,
right now,
yes, indeed.
in Adjoa Safo case, for the entire sitting of Parliament, they have not had any representation. Let me get quickly Guilford to give me a quick word. Guilford, you guys at the CDD do this almost regularly. Aren't you tired that, from your evidence, it's getting worse and not better? Nothing seems to be happening, because your hope is that this will feed into policy. It doesn't appear that it's happening.
Well, Evans, when someone is chasing you and the person is not tired, you, the one who is running away, can never be tired. So these are things that undermine our democracy and our development. So we will continue to talk about it. And it's not even us just talking about these things. These are the views of people. So we will continue to mobilize the views of Ghanaians and share with all policymakers and the rest of the society for us to find resolution to these problems, because if we don't solve them, we are only sitting on a time bomb. At the end of the day, our democracy, our governance, and all the structures and the things that we admire so much will slip through our hands. So it's about time we doubled up our efforts and try to do everything within our power to ensure that we resolve these issues that keep coming and going every now and then.
Guilford, thank you. Dr. Rashid Rahman, I'm grateful. Sylvia, I'm grateful indeed. I mean, you've made your point very clear that the society needs to be, we need to look at it from a societal point of view. Let's see if that reflects in the, I know, look, the judiciary I believe they should be above reproach, and I believe they are fantastic judges who do their work on a daily basis. This could possibly be a perception that may not reflect reality, but many people say it does. Let's fix it. Enjoy the rest of it.